The rain was unforgiving that evening, soaking the streets like the sky itself was crying. Ethan stepped out of his black SUV, designer coat shielding him from the downpour. He was heading into a charity gala, another press event, another speech, about wealth and giving back. But fate had its own speech to deliver, just outside those glass doors. A soft voice caught his ears. A child, barefoot and shivering, asking for bread. Beside him, another little one clung to a woman wrapped in a torn shawl. Ethan turned slightly, out of instinct. Not pity, just curiosity. But when he saw the woman's face, his world stopped. Time seemed to fold in on itself. His breath caught. That woman begging in rags was her, his first love, his everything. Sophie. The girl he once promised a forever to. The girl he left behind for money, success, and a life of luxury. But she wasn't supposed to be here like this. Not on this street. Not with children. Not begging. His hands trembled as he took a step closer, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. She hadn't seen him yet. Her eyes were too focused on shielding the children from the cold. "Spare some food, sir. Just for the kids." Her voice broke. Soft, cracked, but unmistakably hers. He felt the guilt rise in his chest like a tide he couldn't stop. Sophie, the woman he'd once loved more than anything, was now asking him for mercy, and she didn't even recognize him. Sophie's hands trembled as she wrapped the threadbare shawl tighter around her children's shoulders. The cold seeped through her bones, but she only cared about keeping them warm. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, but every scrap she found went to her boys. Their tiny stomachs growled, but they never complained. They were used to hunger now. Her younger son, Jamie, looked up at her with tired, innocent eyes. "Mama? Will? We have a bed tonight?" Sophie smiled through the ache in her chest, brushing his wet hair back. "Yes, baby. Maybe tonight we'll get lucky." Beside her, Noah clutched her sleeve and pointed to a discarded sandwich across the road. "Look, Mama, food!" Sophie's heart shattered. She knew it was filthy, but she nodded anyway. She watched him run through puddles to grab it, every step piercing her with guilt. A passing businessman scoffed, muttering, "Disgusting. Letting kids scavenge like that." She turned her face away, swallowing pride like poison. They didn't know she once wore gowns, danced barefoot under the stars with the boy she loved. They didn't know she once dreamed of opening a flower shop and raising a family in a warm home. Now her days were filled with dodging rain, begging at corners and pretending she wasn't breaking inside. She didn't cry anymore. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. But her children still laughed sometimes, even while soaked and barefoot. That innocence was her only reason to survive. Every giggle was a spark in the darkness, reminding her she couldn't give up. Not yet, not ever. For them, she had to stay strong. And as Ethan stood silently, watching from a distance, the sight burned into his soul. Her smile, faint, hollow, yet so full of love, was the purest thing he'd seen in years. He remembered her laughter, her wild dreams, her belief in happy endings. And now she was here, begging strangers to keep her babies alive. He gripped the door handle of the gala tighter, unable to walk away. Something inside him shifted. Pain, regret, maybe even shame. This wasn't just any woman. This was Sophie, the same girl who once gave him every part of her heart without ever asking for anything back. And now she had nothing, but still gave everything she had to her children. Her sons didn't know their mom once glowed brighter than any diamond. They only knew her warmth, her stories, her love, and that innocence, that small world they clung to amidst chaos. It struck Ethan harder than any business failure ever had. Ethan stood frozen as the gala lights shimmered behind him, mocking his silence. His name echoed inside. "Mr. Carter, the press is waiting." But he couldn't look away. The woman? Outside was not just any beggar. She was the person who once believed in his dreams before he even had them. She was the girl who skipped her own meals just to make sure. He studied well during college. He had traded her laughter for champagne toasts. He left behind her handmade cards for luxury watches and custom-tailored suits. And now the same woman sat on a sidewalk, soaked and shaking, shielding her sons from the rain, while he stood in a $1,000 coat, protected, celebrated, empty. Ethan's chest tightened as guilt clawed at him with a new kind of rage. A rage at himself for choosing power over love, greed over truth, pride over loyalty. He remembered the day he walked away from her. She had cried but smiled anyway, saying, "Go chase your dreams. Just don't forget who you are." He had promised he wouldn't, but he had. Every step he took into the world of money was a step away from her warmth. And now that world felt cold, soulless, even with all the lights around him. He looked at Sophie's kids again. Their faces were tired, yet pure. And suddenly, his empire meant nothing. What was wealth if it couldn't protect the woman who once believed he was enough even when he was broke? What was success if the cost was leaving innocence to freeze in the rain? That question echoed louder than the applause, waiting inside. That night, he wasn't the millionaire. He was the failure. He had failed her, and worse. He didn't even know how much pain she'd swallowed to survive all these years. He wondered what happened after he left. Who held her hand when her dreams broke? Who picked her up when life tore her down? The silence answered for him. No one. And she still endured. Still raised 2 kids with love, dignity, and fire in her soul. He saw it now. Not everyone who begs has given up. Some do it because they won't let their children fall. And in that moment, Ethan Carter, the man with everything, realized he had nothing. That was the beginning of his awakening. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped down the marble stairs of the gala, ignoring the shouts of reporters and flashing cameras that still held his name. He was no longer the millionaire. He was just a man who had left everything good behind. The rain soaked his designer suit, but he didn't care. The rain felt right now, as though the world itself was washing away his sins. He didn't even glance at the luxury cars parked along the curb. He was no longer part of that world. He reached the sidewalk where Sophie sat, her sons huddled, together for warmth. Her gaze lifted, and for a brief moment, the world stood still. Time slowed as her eyes met his. Those same eyes that once held so much love for him. The same eyes that now held the weight of a life she never chose. Sophie. He whispered, his voice breaking like glass, vulnerable and raw. Her lips trembled as she recognized him. Ethan, what are you doing here? The words he had rehearsed 1,000 times crumbled as he saw her face, the face of the woman he had walked away from, the face of the girl who had given him everything. I came because I couldn't stand it anymore, he whispered, his hands shaking. He fell to his knees, not caring that his clothes were ruined by the cold, filthy street beneath him. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively moved closer to her children, shielding them, as if the past he represented was something she had to protect them from. You shouldn't be here, Ethan. Her voice was a mix of pain, disbelief, and a strange kind of sadness. You made your choice a long time ago. He could barely breathe as the weight of her words hit him, but he couldn't turn away. He'd turned away from her once, and that had destroyed him. I wasn't strong enough to fight for you. I thought I could live without you, without the life we dreamed of. But I was wrong, Sophie. So wrong. Her lips tightened, her gaze unwavering. And what now? What are you going to do, Ethan? Apologize for abandoning me? For leaving us behind while you built an empire on my heart? His chest tightened as he saw the cold wall she'd built around herself, the wall he had put there when he walked out. He reached out, but the words were still trapped in his throat. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, his voice thick. I don't deserve it. But I'm here now. For you. For them. Sophie's gaze flickered to the two children, her sons. Jamie was holding her hand, eyes wide with innocence. Noah was pressing his face against her shoulder, still unsure about the man in front of them. I wasn't there for you, Ethan continued, his voice cracking. I wasn't there for them. I wasn't there for us. He took a deep breath, struggling to steady himself. But I want to be now. I'll do whatever it takes. Sophie's hand gently cupped Jamie's face. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears, but they weren't tears of regret. No, they were tears of strength, of years spent carrying a weight no one would ever understand. She'd endured it all, alone. And now, this man, the one who had left her to fight alone, stood before her, asking for redemption. Jamie, sensing the heaviness of the moment, tugged on her sleeve. Mama, who's he? Sophie looked down at her son, her heart breaking again. Someone I used to know, she whispered, but there was no bitterness in her tone, only the remnants of a love she had long buried. Ethan looked at the two boys, her boys. He could barely hold himself together. They didn't know him, but they were his. They were a piece of her, the woman he had once loved. Sophie didn't turn away when Ethan reached for them. She let him, letting him touch the little ones she had spent years protecting. Jamie, Ethan whispered to her son, his voice cracking, I wish I could change the past. I wish I could go back and be the man I should have been. Sophie didn't say anything. Ethan's eyes moved to the old necklace Sophie still wore, the broken heart locket, the one he had given her years ago. He could see the crack running down the center, the two pieces of a love story that had long since been fractured. I never wanted this, Sophie, he choked out. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was chasing something important, something that would make us better, but all I did was destroy everything that was good. She glanced at the locket and then back at him. It doesn't matter anymore. Ethan, you can't change what's been done. Ethan's heart shattered as he finally understood. All the wealth in the world, all the success, all the fame, none of it could fix the brokenness he had created. He pulled something from his pocket, an old rusted chain, Sophie gasped as he handed it to her. It's the other half, he whispered. I carried it every day, even when I didn't deserve to. Sophie's fingers brushed over the worn metal, tears silently slipping down her cheeks. This was the moment of truth, of raw emotion, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of healing. She didn't push him away. She didn't run. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the tears fall, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone anymore. Ethan reached out, not to take, but to give back the love and care he had once taken for granted, for her, for them, for the children. And as they stood there, in the rain, together but apart, something inside Sophie softened, just a little. And something inside Ethan, too. Something old, something pure, stirred, remembering what it was like to love. Ethan straightened, his eyes blazing with newfound purpose. The soft patter of rain on the pavement was no longer a distraction. It was a signal that his time had come to make things right. I won't walk away again, he said, his voice low but filled with the kind of determination that only comes after the deepest regret. I won't let you face this alone. Sophie didn't respond right away. Her gaze shifted to her kids, her sons, who were holding on to each other, clinging to their mother as if she was the only anchor in a storm. Her heart wavered. She had raised them alone for so long, always telling herself that she could do this by herself, that she didn't need Ethan to survive. But the weight of her own silent struggle was taking its toll. Ethan stepped forward, his voice gaining strength. I've been selfish. I let the world convince me that my worth was in money, in power. But I see now what true strength is. Glanced down at the rusted chain in his hand, still holding the two halves of the broken heart he and Sophie had once shared. The symbol of his failure. But now it was the symbol of his redemption. I won't let your children live in the shadows of a man who abandoned them. I won't let them wonder what kind of man their father is. Not anymore. Sophie's eyes met his again, filled with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. Hope. But it was fragile. So fragile. Ethan, she whispered, almost afraid to believe his words. You don't owe me anything. You left us once. You don't have to. I owe you everything, he interrupted, his voice sharp with conviction. And I'm going to prove it. You've done this alone long enough. Let me help you now. The words felt like a promise, a vow that hung heavy between them. Sophie saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Honesty. A burning need to make up for the years he had lost. He turned to the boys who were now watching him cautiously. They didn't understand the weight of the past, but they saw the man before them as someone who had come to make amends. Ethan's gaze softened and he crouched down to their level. I know I've been a stranger to you, he said gently. But I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm here to stay. And I'll do whatever it takes to be the man you deserve. Thisai. Youngest boy Jamie stared up at him, his small face confused. Are you really going to stay? Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with the emotion of that simple question. He had spent so many years wondering what it would feel like to have everything, only to realize he had never truly had anything until now. I'm here for you, he promised. I'll never leave again. Sophie watched, her breath catching in her chest. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe. Ethan stood up, his shoulders squared as if he were preparing for a battle. But this time, the battle wasn't against the world. It was against the guilt that had haunted him for years. It was against the man he had become and the love he had abandoned. I'm not the man I was when I walked away from you, Ethan said, his voice strong, almost fierce. I've learned what it means to lose everything. And I'll spend every day for the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you, Sophie. Sophie took a deep breath. Her fingers tightened around the locket she wore. The broken heart that symbolized her pain and strength. You don't have to prove anything to me. Just show me that you're here, for good. Ethan nodded. For good. And I'm going to make sure that you and the boys never have to worry about anything. Again. Not a thing. I'll protect you. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, she saw the man she once knew. A man capable of greatness, but one who had to lose everything to find himself. Sophie took a step forward, her resolve steady, though her heart was still unsure. And how are you going to do that? You can't just wish things away, Ethan. You can't just undo the past. No, he said, shaking his head. But I can change the future. Our future. Together. His words hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise, one that would either be fulfilled or broken. Sophie was still hesitant, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. And then, without saying another word, she did the one thing that terrified her more than anything. She trusted him. Ethan stretched out his hand to her, his eyes filled with the same determination. Let me show you, Sophie. Let me show you that I've learned. I'm here. I'm staying. Ethan's resolve had been building with each passing second, but as he stood there in front of Sophie and the boys, a deep unease began to twist in his gut. He had never been more certain of one thing in his life. He needed to prove himself not just to her, but to himself. Yet the looming question remained. Would Sophie believe him? Would he be able to overcome the brokenness of their past? The air between them felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Sophie hadn't said a word in response. The world around them seemed to fall silent. The sound of the city, the rain, even the distant hum of the gala, all faded into the background as Ethan's mind raced, contemplating his next move. He couldn't afford to lose her again, not after all he had been through, not after everything he'd learned. But as Sophie stood there, her face unreadable, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he was too late. He glanced at the boys again. They were the quiet center of this storm, their innocent eyes wide with curiosity and uncertainty. They had no idea of the tension and history swirling around them, but that made them all the more precious. They were Sophie's legacy, he thought, and he had a role to play in it, whether he deserved it or not. He took another step forward. "Sophie, I know you've been hurt," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "But we don't have to keep living in the past. We don't have to carry this weight anymore. Please, let me help you." She didn't respond immediately. For what seemed like an eternity, she just stared at him, her expression hard to read. Her eyes were tired, but beneath that exhaustion, Ethan could see something else, something familiar: hope. But that hope was buried deep, too deep for him to simply reach in and claim it. Sophie had built walls around her heart for a reason, and Ethan knew that. He'd built them too, walls against the pain, against the fear of rejection, against the failure of the man he once was. Was he too far gone? The question kept echoing in his mind, gnawing at him like a relentless tide. He had already done so much damage. How could he undo it all? How could he fix this? But just as that doubt crept in, Sophie spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "I don't want to live in the past either, Ethan. But it's not as simple as just moving on. I've spent years protecting myself, protecting my boys from all the things you left behind. Do you understand how hard that was? How much I sacrificed for us to survive without you?" Ethan's heart cracked. He had always known it was hard for her, but hearing her say it aloud hit him like a freight train. She had fought alone, and she had done it all for the boys, for herself. It wasn't just about survival. It was about rebuilding a life from the wreckage he'd left behind. He stepped closer, his voice full of emotion. "I understand more than you think. I understand that. I can never make up for the years I lost. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to show you that I'm here now. I'm not asking you to forget the past, Sophie. I'm asking you to trust that I've changed." Sophie's eyes flickered with something between doubt and longing. She looked away for a moment, her face softening, and Ethan seized that moment, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. "You don't have to take my word for it. Let me prove it to you. Let me show you who I am now." But before Sophie could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. It was one of the gala's security guards, rushing toward them with a frantic look on his face. "Mr. Walker, the press is gathering outside. They're trying to get to you. You need to leave now." Ethan didn't even look at the man. His attention was solely on Sophie, his determination unwavering. This wasn't about the press. It was about Sophie. About his family. "I don't care about the press," Ethan said with a finality that left no room for argument. "You can tell them I'm done with all of this. I don't need it. I only need to make things right with her. With us." For the first time in years, Sophie felt her chest tighten. Not from fear, but from something far more vulnerable. Hope. That fleeting, fragile emotion that had been buried so long ago, and yet here it was, creeping back in. The security guard hesitated, unsure of how to respond to Ethan's command. He had never seen the billionaire act like this before, never seen him so vulnerable. But something in Ethan's eyes made it clear. This was no longer about fame or wealth. This was about redemption, and nothing could stand in his way. Sophie's heart raced. She could see the man in front of her now, not the one who had walked away, but someone entirely different. A man who had experienced loss, who had felt the weight of his mistakes, who was now willing to fight for what he had once abandoned. And yet the question still lingered. Was it enough? Sophie stood there, torn between the past and the present, between everything she had fought for and everything he was promising now. Her heart wanted to believe him. But trust was a fragile thing, and it would take more than words to restore what had been broken. Sensing her hesitation, Ethan took another step closer, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll wait for you. As long as it takes. I'll wait until you're ready." The rain continued to fall, but it didn't feel as cold anymore. Instead, there was a warmth that seemed to rise from within Ethan, something new and steady. And it was that warmth that reached out to Sophie, like a beacon in the darkness. But Sophie wasn't ready. Not yet. And so, with a deep breath, she made the decision. "I can't make promises yet, Ethan, but I'll give you one chance. One chance to show me who you are now." Her words hit him like a wave, but this time it wasn't a wave of devastation. It was a wave of possibility. A chance. A second chance. Ethan's heart soared. He had never wanted anything more than this, than the possibility of redemption, of a second chance at the life they had dreamed of, together. He nodded, his voice steady with promise. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Sophie turned her back to him, her face softening as she looked down at her children. She had made her choice. She would fight for this, fight for them. And Ethan would fight for her. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan's commitment to change wasn't just words, it was his every action. Sophie watched, at first in disbelief, then slowly with a heart more open than it had been in years. Ethan didn't try to rush her or force her to move faster than she was ready. He understood the weight of her trust, the fragility of what he was asking for, and he was willing to wait, day after day. In the weeks that followed, their interactions became a dance of cautious hope. Sophie found herself looking at him differently. His touch was no longer that of a man who'd let her go, but of someone who was determined to rebuild, brick by brick, what they once had. The healing wasn't immediate, but it was real. Ethan spent every moment proving himself, not just with grand gestures, but in the small, quiet ways. Showing up when he said he would, caring for the boys as if they were his own, helping Sophie, with the little things that often went unnoticed. It was the consistency of his actions that spoke louder than anything else. One rainy evening, when they were sitting in the quiet of Sophie's living room, her boys snuggled up on the couch, Sophie caught herself staring at Ethan, truly staring at him. For the first time in years, her heart wasn't locked in a cage. She realized then, with a clarity that took her breath away, that the man sitting beside her wasn't the same person who had walked away. No. This man had fought for her, fought for their family, and had rebuilt himself piece by piece. Ethan caught her gaze and smiled softly, that same warmth she had seen before in his eyes. But this time it was more than just a smile of apology. It was a smile of hope, of promise. "Sophie," he said, his voice steady and filled with meaning. "I know we can't erase the past, but we can create something beautiful from it. Something real." Her heart skipped a beat. Was it possible to find love after all this time? Was it possible to rebuild what they had lost? Sophie's hands trembled as she placed them on her lap, unsure whether to give in to the hope he was offering, unsure if she was ready to fully let go of the past. But there, in that moment, she realized that the future she had been fighting for wasn't a future of resentment and pain. It was a future where healing, love, and redemption could coexist. "I'm ready," Sophie whispered, her voice catching as tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to until now. She wasn't just ready for a future with Ethan, she was ready to let go of the anger, the resentment, the hurt. She was ready to step forward into a life of healing, not just for herself, but for their family. Ethan's eyes softened, the weight of her words hitting him like a flood of emotion. Without saying another word, he reached for her hand, his touch, gentle but sure. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. They didn't need to rush into anything. They didn't need to make any grand promises. All they needed was the willingness to try again, to start fresh, to be present for each other, every day. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. And with each passing moment, their bond grew stronger. The boys had begun to call Ethan Dad, without hesitation. Sophie had found herself laughing again, her heart lighter than it had been in so long. They celebrated birthdays, holidays, and small victories as a family, moments of joy that built on the foundation of trust and love they had been rebuilding. And then, on the day that felt like the perfect moment to seal their new beginning, Ethan stood before Sophie in the middle of a park, the sun shining softly overhead. With a small smile, he got down on one knee, holding out a ring, the same ring he had once given her in their youth. This time, there was no hesitation in her heart. "I know this time is different," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I can't promise you a perfect life, but I can promise you that I will spend every single day proving to you that I am the man you deserve. Will you marry me again, Sophie?" Sophie's heart swelled with emotion, the weight of the past and the promise of the future all converging in one perfect moment. The tears that filled her eyes were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of joy, of hope, of love rediscovered. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Ethan, I will." And as they embraced, surrounded by the laughter of their children, Sophie knew that this was the beginning of something beautiful. The past was no longer a heavy burden to carry. It had been transformed into a story of redemption, of healing, of love that had been tested and had ultimately emerged stronger. Together, they would face whatever the future brought. They had learned that love wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, and sometimes painful. But it was also worth fighting for. And they would fight for it, side by side, forever. As they walked hand in hand with their children at their side, Sophie couldn't help but feel that this was the way it was always meant to be. The future was bright, and for the first time in years, she felt ready to embrace it fully. Together, they had found the clarity they had been searching for. The clarity that no matter how broken they had been, they had the power to heal, to grow, and to love again. And with that, hope bloomed once more in their hearts.